The heart monitor's steady beeping was the only sound breaking the silence of the emergency room at 3:47 a.m. My scrubs clung to my body, soaked with a mixture of sweat and blood that wasn't my own. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows across the trauma bay where I'd just spent the last 4 hours fighting death itself. My hands trembled slightly as I finally pulled off my latex gloves. The adrenaline that had kept me going slowly ebbing away like water down a drain. The man on the gurney before me was breathing. That was all that mattered right now. When the paramedics had wheeled him in, I'd honestly thought we were looking at a Dewey. 3 gunshot wounds to the torso, massive blood loss, no identification, no insurance cards, no emergency contacts. Just a man who looked like he'd crawled out of hell itself, with all his skin gone ashen and dark hair matted with dried blood. "You did it again, Sarah," whispered Maria, the night shift nurse who'd assisted me. Her voice carried that mixture of exhaustion and awe that I'd grown accustomed to after 5 years in Miami, General's trauma unit. Dr. Rodriguez said there was no way he'd make it through the night when they brought him in. I stared down at my patient, studying the rise and fall of his chest. Even unconscious and pale as death, there was something commanding about him. His jaw was sharp and defined, covered with several days' worth of stubble that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than unkempt. His hands, now clean of blood and properly bandaged, were large and calloused in a way that spoke of a life far removed from office work or suburban comfort. "What do you think happened to him?" Maria asked, helping me adjust his foredrip. Those weren't random bullet wounds. Someone really wanted him dead. I'd been wondering the same thing. In 5 years of emergency medicine, I'd seen my share of violence. Gang shootings, domestic disputes gone wrong, random muggings in Miami's less savory neighborhoods. But this was different. The precision of the wounds, the expensive watch still strapped to his wrist despite everything he'd been through, the way his hands felt when I checked his pulse. These weren't the hands of someone who lived paycheck to paycheck like I did. "Doesn't matter," I said finally, though my curiosity was eating at me. "We don't get to choose who deserves saving." "That's not our job," Maria nodded, but I caught her stealing glances at him as we finished our post-surgery checks. I couldn't blame her. Even half dead and connected to more machines than I could count, there was an undeniable magnetism about him. When I'd been working on him earlier, during those critical moments when his heart had stopped twice, I'd found myself staring into his face and thinking about what color his eyes might be when they opened. The thought made me shake my head at myself. Here was a man who'd clearly been involved in something violent enough to warrant multiple assassination attempts, and I was wondering about his eye color like some teenager with a crush. "Professional distance, Sarah? That's what kept you alive in this job." "I'm going to stay with him for a while," I told Maria. "Just until we're sure he's stabilized. Your shift ended an hour ago," she pointed out. "You've been here for 13 hours straight. Go home, get some sleep. I'll keep an eye on him." But I couldn't leave. Something about this nameless man pulled at me in a way I couldn't explain. Maybe it was the way he'd fought so hard to stay alive during surgery, even unconscious. Or maybe it was the strange gentleness in his face when he wasn't grimacing in pain. Whatever it was, I found myself pulling up a chair next to his bed. The next few hours passed in a blur of vital sign checks and medication adjustments. I dozed fitfully in my chair, jerking awake every time one of his monitors beeped or his breathing changed. Around 6 a.m., as the Miami sunrise started filtering through the trauma bay windows, his eyelids began to flutter. I leaned forward, my heart rate picking up. "Sir, can you hear me?" His eyes opened slowly and I felt my breath catch. They were the darkest brown I'd ever seen, almost black, with an intensity that seemed to look right through me even in his weakened state. For a moment, we just stared at each other. He tried to speak, but only managed a hoarse whisper that I couldn't make out. "Don't try to talk yet," I said softly, reaching for his water cup. "You've been through major surgery. You're safe now. You're at Miami General Hospital." He accepted the small sip of water I offered, his eyes never leaving my face. When he spoke again, his voice was rough but clear enough to understand. "You saved me." It wasn't a question. The certainty in his voice, the way he said it, made something flutter in my chest. "It's my job," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. No, his hand moved slightly on the bed, not quite reaching toward me, but the intention was clear. "You fought for me." I remember ... pieces. "You wouldn't let me go." The way he said it made heat rise in my cheeks. Had I been that obvious? During those moments when we'd lost him on the table, I had fought harder than usual to bring him back. Something about him had made giving up feel impossible. "What's your name?" I asked, deflecting from his intensity. "We need to update your chart, contact your family." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite sadness, but a kind of resigned acceptance. "I don't have family that would be contacted for something like this." "Friends?" "Employer? Someone must be worried about you." He almost smiled at that, a ghost of an expression that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than amused. No one who would call the hospital to check on my welfare. Before I could ask what he meant by that cryptic statement, Dr. Rodriguez appeared at the foot of the bed. "Mitchell, what are you still doing here? I thought you went home hours ago." "I wanted to make sure he's stabilized," I said, standing up from my chair and realizing how stiff my back had become. "Well, looks like your patient is awake and alert," Dr. Rodriguez said, checking the man's chart. "Vitals are strong. You did excellent work, but you need to go home and get some rest." "That's an order." I gathered my things, but found myself hesitating at the bedside. The nameless man was watching me again with those intense dark eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For everything." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and headed for the door. But his voice stopped me before I could leave. "What's your name?" I turned back. Sarah Mitchell." "Sarah Mitchell," he repeated, like he was committing it to memory. "I won't forget." The drive home to my small apartment in Coral Gables should have taken 20 minutes, but I found myself sitting in Miami morning traffic, replaying every moment of the last few hours. There was something about my mysterious patient that I couldn't shake. The way he looked at me, the certainty in his voice when he thanked me, the expensive watch and manicured fingernails that suggested a life very different from the gunshot victims I usually treated. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, exhaustion was hitting me like a wave. I'd been running on adrenaline and caffeine for almost 14 hours, and my body was finally demanding payment. All I wanted was a hot shower and 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. My apartment was a modest one-bedroom on the second floor of a converted house, nothing fancy but clean and safe. I'd chosen it specifically because it was in a quiet neighborhood, where the biggest excitement was usually Mrs. Chun's cat getting stuck in the oak tree out front. After dealing with trauma and chaos at the hospital, I needed a space that felt peaceful. I climbed the stairs slowly, my legs feeling like lead. The morning sun was getting stronger, and I could already tell it was going to be another scorching Miami day. My air conditioning bill was going to be brutal this month, but the thought of coming home to a cool, quiet apartment was the only thing that had gotten me through some of the more difficult cases lately. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside, dropping my purse and keys on the small table by the entrance. The familiar smell of the vanilla candle I'd lit yesterday morning still lingered in the air, mixed with the scent of the coffee I'd made before my shift. Home, finally. The shower was exactly what I needed. Hot water washed away the antiseptic smell of the hospital and the tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders. I let myself think about my mysterious patient one more time as I shampooed my hair. By now, he was probably being transferred to a regular room. Maybe he'd remember to give the staff his real name. Maybe he'd call whatever contacts he actually had. Maybe I'd never see him again. The thought bothered me more than it should have. Professional distance, I reminded myself again. I'd done my job, saved a life, and now I needed to let it go. That's how this worked. I was just wrapping myself in a towel when I heard voices outside. Multiple voices, speaking in low, urgent tones. That was strange, Mrs. Chun was usually the only one up this early, and she lived alone. I moved to my bedroom window and peered through the blinds to see what was happening. What I saw made my blood freeze. There were men in my front yard, a lot of men. They were all wearing dark suits despite the early morning heat, and they were all kneeling. Not sitting, not standing, but kneeling in the grass with their heads bowed. I counted quickly, 15, maybe 20 of them, arranged in neat rows like they were attending some kind of outdoor service. My hands started shaking as I gripped the windowsill. This was not normal. Nothing about this was normal. Men in expensive suits didn't just appear in random apartment complex yards at 7 in the morning and kneel in the grass. This was the kind of thing you called the police about. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, but before I could dial 911, I saw him. Walking up the sidewalk toward my building like he owned the entire neighborhood, my patient from the hospital. The man with no name who had spent the night fighting to save. Except he wasn't wearing a hospital gown anymore. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. His dark hair was slicked back, and despite the fact that he'd been dying on my operating table less than 4 hours ago, he moved with the fluid confidence of someone completely in control. I watched in stunned silence as he approached the kneeling men. They didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him, just maintained their positions in absolute stillness. He said something I couldn't hear from my second-floor window, and every single one of them placed their hands flat on the ground in front of them, a gesture that looked like some kind of formal submission. This was insane. I had to be dreaming. There was no way the barely alive gunshot victim I treated was now orchestrating some kind of bizarre ceremony in my front yard. But as I pinched myself hard enough to leave a mark, nothing changed. The men were still there, still kneeling, and my former patient was still moving among them with the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. I threw on clothes as quickly as possible, jeans and a t-shirt that I didn't bother to tuck in properly. My wet hair was dripping down my back, but I didn't care. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Whatever this was, whatever was happening in my quiet, safe neighborhood, it was connected to me. It had to be. The timing couldn't be a coincidence. I ran down the stairs and pushed through my front door, not caring that I was barefoot and probably looked like I'd just rolled out of bed. Because I essentially had. The morning sun hit me like a physical force, already hot enough to make the asphalt shimmer. But what stopped me cold wasn't the heat. It was the sight of my mysterious patient standing in the middle of my yard like he belonged there, surrounded by men who were treating him like royalty. Up close, in daylight, he was even more imposing than he'd been in the hospital bed. Taller than I'd realized, probably 6'3" or 4", with broad shoulders that filled out his expensive suit perfectly. The pallor from blood loss was completely gone, replaced by the healthy olive complexion of someone who spent time in the sun. But it was his eyes that held me frozen. Those same dark, intense eyes that had looked at me with such gratitude just hours before. "Miss Mitchell," he said, and his voice was completely different from the rough whisper I'd heard in the hospital. Rich and deep, with just a trace of an accent I couldn't place. "I apologize for disturbing your morning." I started, then stopped. My mouth felt dry, and not just from the heat. What is this? What's happening? He gestured to the kneeling men without taking his eyes off me. These men are here to pay their respects. "You saved my life last night, Miss Mitchell." "That creates a debt." "A debt?" I repeated stupidly. "I don't understand. I was doing my job." "You don't owe me anything." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening around his eyes. "In my world, Miss Mitchell, there are rules about debts of honor. When someone saves your life, especially someone who asks nothing in return, that debt must be acknowledged properly." "Your world?" The pieces were starting to come together in a way that made my stomach clench with fear. The expensive clothes, the gunshot wounds, the men treating him like he was some kind of king. "Who are you?" "My name is Julian Marcetti," he said, like that should mean something to me. When I continued to stare at him blankly, he added, "I run certain business operations in South Florida." Business operations. Right. The kind of business operations that resulted in multiple gunshot wounds and men in suits kneeling in suburban front yards. I took a step backwards, suddenly very aware that I was standing in my yard in bare feet and damp hair, surrounded by what were probably criminals. "I think you should leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "All of you. I saved your life because that's what I do. I'm a nurse." But this ... I gestured at the bizarre scene around us. "This is not normal. This is not okay." "You're right," Julian said, and I was surprised by his agreement. "This is not your world. You shouldn't have to deal with any of this." He raised his voice slightly, speaking to the kneeling men without turning away from me. "Alzatavi." Every single man rose to his feet in perfect unison, their movements precise and coordinated. It was like watching a military unit, except these weren't soldiers. These were men in expensive suits who moved like they were used to violence. "But I'm afraid it's too late for that," Julian continued, his attention back on me. "You're already involved, Miss Mitchell. The moment you decided to fight for my life, you became part of this." "No," I said, shaking my head. "No, that's not how this works. I help people. That's all I did." "I'm not part of whatever this is. You are now." The finality in his voice made me take another step back. But there was nowhere to go. I was standing in my own front yard, surrounded by men who clearly worked for someone powerful enough to warrant assassination attempts and loyal enough to kneel in the grass on his command. I could call the police, I said, though my phone was upstairs and these men could probably stop me before I got to the front door. You could, Julian agreed. But they wouldn't be able to protect you from the people who tried to kill me last night. And those people now know exactly who you are and where you live. The blood drained from my face. What do you mean? Hospital records, Miss Mitchell. My enemies have people everywhere, including inside Miami General. By now, they know that Julian Marcetti didn't die in that trauma bay. They know who was responsible for keeping him alive. They know your name, your address, your schedule. I felt sick. This couldn't be happening. This was supposed to be my safe space, my quiet life away from the chaos of the emergency room. But as I looked around at the men still standing at attention in my yard, as I registered the expensive cars now parked along my street, I realized that safety had been an illusion. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you have two choices, Julian said, stepping closer. Not threatening, but close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that reminded me of leather and cedar. You can pretend this never happened, go back to your normal life, and hope that my enemies decide you're not worth eliminating, or ... or you accept my protection. Let me make sure you stay safe while this situation resolves itself. I stared at him, trying to process what he was offering. Protection from a man who was clearly involved in organized crime, who had enough power to command the loyalty of 20 men and enough enemies to warrant multiple assassination attempts. What kind of protection? I asked quietly. The kind that keeps you alive, he said simply. My word is absolute in the city, Miss Mitchell. Under my protection, no one touches you. No one threatens you? No one so much as looks at you wrong. And in exchange? Nothing. This isn't a business transaction. It's payment of a debt. I looked around at the men still standing in my yard, all of them focused on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. My neighbors were starting to peer out their windows, probably wondering what kind of bizarre gathering was happening in front of my building. Mrs. Cheng was standing on her porch with her arms crossed, looking like she was ready to call the homeowners association. I need time to think, I said finally. Time is a luxury you may not have, Julian replied. But I understand this is overwhelming, take today. But Miss Mitchell ... double quotes, he paused, and there was something almost gentle in his expression. Don't underestimate the danger you're in. The people who want me dead don't leave loose ends. He turned and said something in what sounded like Italian to his men. They immediately began moving toward their cars with the same coordinated precision they'd shown when kneeling. Within minutes, my front yard was empty except for Julian himself. How do I contact you? I asked, hating myself for asking but knowing I needed the answer. If I decide to accept your ... protection. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. Simple, expensive-looking cardstock with nothing but a phone number embossed in gold. Call any time, day or night. Someone will always answer. I took the card, my fingers brushing against his for just a moment. His hands were warm and rough with calluses, despite the expensive manicure. Hands that had clearly done manual labor, but also hands that were accustomed to giving commands. Sarah, he said, using my first name for the first time since the hospital. I meant what I said earlier. I won't forget what you did for me. I was just doing my job, I said again, but the words felt hollow now. No, he said, echoing what he'd told me in the trauma bay. You fought for me. That means something. He walked away then, moving toward a black Mercedes that I hadn't noticed earlier. The driver held the door open for him, and Julian paused before getting in. For what it's worth, he called back to me, I'm sorry you got pulled into this. You deserve better. And then he was gone, leaving me standing barefoot in my front yard, holding a business card that felt like it was burning a hole in my palm. I looked around at the normal suburban morning continuing around me. Mrs. Chen had gone back inside. A jogger was running past like nothing had happened. The landscaping crew was starting work on the complex across the street. Everything looked exactly the same as it had every other morning for the past 2 years. But nothing would ever be the same again. I went back upstairs and sat on my bed, staring at the business card, just a phone number. No name, no business logo, nothing to indicate what kind of life I'd just been offered entry into. But the weight of it in my hand felt enormous. My phone rang, making me jump. The caller ID showed Miami General. Sarah? Thank God you answered. It was Dr. Rodriguez, and he sounded stressed. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not come into work today. Do not go anywhere public. Are you at home right now? Yes, I said, my mouth going dry again. Why? What's wrong? Your patient from last night? The John Doe with the gunshot wounds. He's gone. Gone? Vanished. Sometime between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m., he just disappeared from his room. No discharge paperwork, no checkout process, nothing. Security footage shows him walking out the front door like he owned the place. I almost laughed. If only Dr. Rodriguez knew that Julian Marcetti had been in my front yard an hour ago orchestrating what looked like a loyalty ceremony with 20 armed men. But that's not the scary part, Dr. Rodriguez continued. 20 minutes after he disappeared, 3 men in suits showed up asking questions about his medical team. Specifically about you, Sarah. They wanted to know your full name, your address, your schedule. My blood turned to ice. Did you tell them? Of course not, but they weren't taking no for an answer. Hospital security had to escort them out, and they seemed very unhappy about it. I think you might be in danger. I'm okay, I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. I'm safe at home. Stay there. I'm calling the police to do a welfare check on you, just in case. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, turning Julian's business card over in my hands. The choice he presented me was becoming clearer by the minute. I could pretend this never happened and hope that professional killers would just forget about the nurse who'd saved their target's life. Or I could accept protection from a man who was clearly dangerous himself, but who seemed genuinely grateful for what I'd done. Neither option felt safe, but one of them felt honest. I picked up my phone and dialed the number on the card. It rang once before a voice answered. Miss Mitchell? Not hello, or can I help you? They'd been expecting my call. I want to talk to Julian, I said. He'll be right with you. There was a brief pause, and then his voice came through the line, as clear as if he were standing next to me. Sarah, I was hoping you'd call. Those men Dr. Rodriguez told me about, the ones asking questions at the hospital, those were the people who tried to kill you. Probably. It doesn't matter who specifically. What matters is that they're looking for you now. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. If I accept your protection, what does that mean exactly? What changes in my life? Everything, he said honestly. And nothing, you'll still be a nurse, you'll still live your life. But you'll do it safely. And you'll do it with the knowledge that anyone who threatens you will answer to me. And what do you get out of it? There was a long pause. Peace of mind. The knowledge that the woman who saved my life is still alive to save other lives. It wasn't the answer I'd expected. There was something almost vulnerable in his voice, something that made me think this wasn't entirely about debt and honor. Okay, I said before I could change my mind. I accept your protection. Thank you, he said, and the relief in his voice was unmistakable. Someone will be at your apartment in 30 minutes to escort you somewhere safe while we handle the immediate threat. Pack whatever you need for a few days. A few days? I can't just disappear. I have work, I have responsibilities. Dr. Rodriguez has already arranged for you to take emergency leave. Your hospital bills will continue to be paid, your apartment rent will be handled. You won't lose anything by letting me keep you safe. You already talked to my boss? I told you, Sarah, my word is absolute in the city. That includes making sure your life continues smoothly while you're under my protection. I should have been angry about the presumption, about the way he'd arranged my life without asking. But instead, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time since I'd become a nurse, someone else was taking responsibility for the chaos. Someone else was handling the impossible situation. Where are you taking me? Somewhere comfortable, somewhere safe, and somewhere you can get to know me better since we're going to be spending time together. You're going to be there too? I'm not trusting your safety to anyone else, he said. Not after what you did for me. After I hung up, I packed a small bag with clothes for 3 days, toiletries, and my nursing textbooks. I didn't know what kind of place Jillian was taking me to, but I figured I might as well use the time productively. I was due for my continuing education credits anyway. I was zipping at my suitcase when I heard a knock at my door. A quick look through the peephole showed a woman in her 50s, professionally dressed, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in an elegant bun. Miss Mitchell? My name is Valentina. Mr. Marsetti sent me to escort you. I opened the door slowly. Valentina looked like someone's grandmother, not the kind of person I'd expected from Julian's organization. But then again, nothing about this situation was what I'd expected. Is there anything else you need from the apartment? She asked in a slight Italian accent. Mr. Marchetti wants to make sure you're comfortable during your stay. I think I have everything, I said, shouldering my bag. Bennett, the car is waiting downstairs. As we walked toward the stairs, I found myself looking back at my apartment one last time. 24 hours ago, my biggest worry had been whether I'd remembered to set my alarm for my next shift. Now I was being escorted to parts unknown by a woman who worked for a man I was pretty sure was a mafia boss. Valentina? I said as we reached the parking lot. What exactly does Mr. Marchetti do for a living? She looked at me with eyes that had clearly seen a lot over the years. He takes care of family, Signorina. That's all you need to know for now. The car was another black Mercedes, this one driven by a man who looked like he doubled as a bodyguard. Valentina sat next to me in the back seat, and I noticed that she kept one hand in our purse throughout the drive. I had a feeling that purse contained something more dangerous than reading glasses and breath mints. We drove through downtown Miami, then out toward the coast. The buildings became larger and more expensive. The cars in the driveways went from practical to luxury, and the landscaping became increasingly elaborate. This was old money territory, the kind of neighborhood where people lived behind gates and privacy hedges. Where are we going? I asked as we turned into a driveway marked only by a discreet brass placard reading Marsetti, home. Valentina said simply. The driveway was long and winding, lined with real palms and perfectly manicured gardens. When the house came into view, I felt my jaw drop. It wasn't just a house, it was a compound. A sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion that looked like it belonged in a magazine, complete with a circular driveway centered around a fountain that probably cost more than my annual salary. Mr. Marchetti lives here? His family has owned this property for 30 years, Valentina explained as our driver pulled up to the front entrance. You'll be staying in the guest wing. Very private, very comfortable. The front door opened before we could knock, revealing Julian himself. He'd changed clothes since this morning, trading the business suit for dark slacks and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Somehow he looked even more imposing in casual clothes. There was something about seeing him in his own environment that emphasized just how much power and wealth I was dealing with. Sarah, he said, stepping forward to take my bag. Welcome to my home. This is incredible, I said, looking around at the soaring ceilings and marble floors of the entryway. Original artwork covered the walls, and I was pretty sure the chandelier hanging above us contained actual crystals. How long have you lived here? Most of my life, he said, leading me through a series of rooms that looked like they belonged in a palace. My grandfather built this place when he first came to America. Every generation has added to it. We passed through a living room with furniture that probably belonged in a museum, a dining room with a table that could seat 20 people, and a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that made me want to curl up with a novel for a week. Everything was elegant but lived in, expensive but comfortable. The guest wing is just through here, Julian said, opening a set of French doors that led to a private courtyard. You'll have your own bedroom, bathroom, sitting area, and kitchenette. Valentina will show you how everything works. Guest suite was larger than my entire apartment and furnished like a high-end hotel. The bedroom had a king-size bed with what looked like Egyptian cotton sheets. The bathroom had a soaking tub that could fit 2 people. And the sitting area had French doors that opened onto a private terrace overlooking the ocean. This is too much, I said, setting my small suitcase down on the antique luggage rack. I can't stay somewhere like this. Why not? Julian asked, and he seemed genuinely confused by my objection. Because I'm a nurse who lives paycheck to paycheck. I don't belong in a place like this. He studied me for a moment with those intense dark eyes. You saved my life, Sarah. You belong wherever I say you belong. And right now, that's here where I can make sure you stay safe. There was something in his tone that made arguing feel pointless. This was clearly a man who was used to getting his way, and I was beginning to understand that crossing him might not be wise. Dinner is at 7, he said. Valentina will come get you when it's time. Until then, rest. You've had a long night and a stressful morning. He started to leave, then paused at the door. Sarah, thank you for trusting me. I know this isn't easy. After he left, I sat on the edge of the enormous bed and tried to process what my life had become in the span of 12 hours. This morning I'd been Sarah Mitchell, night shift trauma nurse. Now I was Sarah Mitchell, protected houseguest of someone who was probably a criminal but who looked at me like I was the most important person in his world. I unpacked my small bag, hanging my few changes of clothes in a walk-in closet that was bigger than my bathroom at home. Everything felt surreal, like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. But when I caught sight of myself in the ornate mirror above the dresser, I looked like the same tired nurse I'd always been. The expensive surroundings didn't change who I was. Around 6 o'clock, Valentina knocked on my door with a garment bag draped over her arm. "Signorina Sarah? Mr. Marchetti thought you might like something appropriate for dinner." She unzipped the bag to reveal a simple but elegant black dress, the kind that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. It was beautiful, sophisticated, and completely unlike anything in my wardrobe. "I can't wear this," I said immediately. "It's too expensive. It's a gift," Valentina said firmly. Mr. Marchetti chose it himself. It would be rude to refuse. So I found myself getting dressed for dinner in a dress that fit me like it had been tailored specifically for my body. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back at me looked elegant, sophisticated, like someone who belonged in a mansion overlooking the ocean. Julian was waiting for me in the dining room, and when he saw me, his expression shifted in a way that made heat rise in my cheeks. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, his dark eyes traveling from my face to the way the dress skinned my body, then back to my eyes. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made my heart skip. "Thank you for the dress." "You didn't have to do that?" "I wanted to," he said, pulling out my chair for me. "You deserve beautiful things, Sarah." Dinner was served by a staff that appeared and disappeared like ghosts, bringing course after course of food that tasted like it came from the most expensive restaurant in Miami. We talked about safe topics at first, my work at the hospital, his family's history in Florida, our mutual love of the ocean. But as the evening progressed and the wine relaxed both of us, the conversation became more personal. "Tell me about your family," Julian said over dessert. "There's not much to tell. My parents died in a car accident when I was 22. No siblings, no extended family to speak of. It's just me." Something shifted in his expression. "I'm sorry. That must have been difficult." "It was. But it's also why I became a nurse. After watching my parents die in an emergency room, I knew I wanted to be on the other side of that experience. I wanted to be the person fighting to save lives instead of the person helplessly watching them slip away. "And you're very good at it," he said. "What you did for me last night, Dr. Rodriguez told my people that any other nurse on that shift would have lost me." "You have a gift." "How do you know what doctor?" Rodriguez said. "I make it my business to know things that are important to me. And you, Sarah Mitchell, are very important to me now." The way he said my name made something warm unfurl in my chest. "Because I saved your life. That's how it started," he admitted. "But it's not why you're still important to me." I looked across the table at him, this dangerous man in his elegant dining room, surrounded by the evidence of wealth and power that came from a world I didn't understand. "Then why?" "Because in 5 hours of knowing you, you've shown me more genuine caring than I've experienced in years. Because you fought for the life of a complete stranger and asked for nothing in return. Because you're sitting in my house, wearing a dress I bought you, and you're still more concerned about whether you deserve to be here than about what I might want from you. What do you want from me?" The question hung between us in the candle-lit dining room. Julian was quiet for a long moment, swirling the wine in his glass. "I want you to be safe," he said finally. "I want you to continue being the person who saves lives and expects nothing in return. And I want ... double quotes." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I want you to stay." "Stay?" "Here, with me. Not just until the threat passes, but after. I want you in my life, Sarah." My heart was beating so fast I was sure he could hear it across the table. "Julian, I don't even know what your life is. I don't know what you do for a living, what kind of danger you're in, what being with you would mean." "Then let me show you," he said, leaning forward. "Let me explain everything, but not tonight. Tonight, I just want you to be safe and comfortable and know that you're exactly where you belong." After dinner, he walked me back to the guest wing and we paused at the French doors that led to my private courtyard. Thank you, I said. For dinner, for the dress, for keeping me safe. I know this isn't simple for you either. You're worth the complication, he said, and then he did something that made my breath catch. He reached up and touched my cheek, just a whisper of contact that sent electricity through my entire body. Sleep well, Sarah. Tomorrow I'll answer all your questions. I lay awake for hours that night in the most comfortable bed I'd ever slept in, staring up at the ceiling and thinking about the man whose life I'd saved. Julian Marcetti was clearly dangerous, clearly involved in things I didn't understand, clearly part of a world that was the opposite of my safe, quiet existence. But when he looked at me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt wanted. Not needed because I could save someone's life, or useful because I could work long hours without complaining. Wanted for who I was, for the person he saw when he looked at me. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely unlike anything I'd ever experienced. And I was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, I wanted him too. The next morning, I woke to the sound of waves and the smell of coffee brewing somewhere in the main house. Sunlight was streaming through the French doors, and I could see the ocean sparkling in the distance. For a moment, I forgot where I was and why I was there. It felt like waking up in a dream. Then reality came flooding back. I was in the guest wing of a mansion owned by a man who was probably a criminal hiding from people who wanted to kill me because I'd saved his life. Not exactly the peaceful morning I planned when I'd gotten off my shift yesterday. There was a soft knock at my door, and Valentina appeared with a breakfast tray that looked like it came from a 5-star hotel. Buongiorno. Signorina, Mr. Marcetti thought you might prefer to eat privately this morning. The tray contained fresh fruit, perfectly prepared eggs, toast that was still warm, and coffee that smelled like heaven. There was also a note written in elegant handwriting. Sarah, take your time this morning. When you're ready, I'd like to show you around the property and answer those questions I promised. Julian, I ate breakfast on my private terrace, watching the ocean and trying to wrap my head around the surreal turn my life had taken. Less than 24 hours ago, I'd been worried about overtime pay and whether I'd remembered to buy milk. Now I was eating gourmet breakfast and planning to get answers about what appeared to be organized crime activity. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to call Dr. Rodriguez, tell him I was sick, and ask Julian to take me home. This wasn't my world. These weren't my people. I was a nurse, not someone who got involved with dangerous men and their complicated lives. But the irrational part of my brain kept thinking about the way Julian had looked at me last night, the genuine gratitude in his voice when he thanked me for trusting him, the careful way he touched my cheek like I was something precious. I'd spent my entire adult life taking care of other people and expecting nothing in return. For once, someone was taking care of me. And despite the danger, despite the uncertainty, despite the fact that I was clearly in over my head, it felt good. I got dressed in my own clothes, jeans and a simple blouse that felt incredibly casual compared to last night's designer dress, and went looking for Julian. The main house was even more impressive in daylight, all soaring ceilings and marble floors and artwork that probably belonged in museums. But it wasn't cold or unwelcoming. There were family photos scattered around, comfortable furniture mixed in with the antiques, and signs everywhere that this was a home, not just a showcase. I found Julian in what looked like a home office, sitting behind a massive wooden desk with papers spread in front of him. He was on the phone, speaking rapid Italian in a tone that suggested he was giving orders rather than having a conversation. When he saw me in the doorway, his expression immediately softened. "2 minuti?" he said into the phone, then hung up and stood to greet me. "Good morning." I hope he slept well. "Better than I have in months," I admitted. "That bed is incredible. I'm glad you were comfortable. Are you ready for that tour I promised?" He led me through the house, explaining the history behind various rooms and pieces of furniture. His grandfather had indeed built the place, arriving in Miami in 1952 with nothing but ambition and a strong back. The family had started with a small construction business and grown from there. "What kind of construction?" I asked as we walked through the library. Julian paused at a shelf full of leather-bound books. "The kind that involved a lot of cash payments and no questions asked," he said honestly. "My grandfather wasn't a saint, Sarah. Neither was my father." "Neither am one." What does that mean exactly? "It means we provide services that other people can't or won't provide. Protection, problem-solving, dispute resolution. Sometimes those services exist in legal gray areas. And sometimes they don't exist in gray areas at all." He turned to face me, and I could see him making a decision about how honest to be. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes what we do is illegal. But it's not random, and it's not without rules. We don't hurt innocent people. We don't deal drugs to kids. We don't prey on the vulnerable. We handle problems for people who have nowhere else to turn. Like what? Like a business owner who can't get the police to take action against someone who's vandalizing his store every night. Like a woman whose ex-husband is stalking her and the restraining order isn't worth the paper it's printed on. Like a family whose teenager is addicted to drugs and they need someone to find out who's supplying him. It wasn't what I'd expected him to say. The movies had always portrayed organized crime as purely selfish, purely violent. But the way Julian described it, it sounded almost like a social service. An unofficial justice system for people who'd fallen through the cracks of the official one. And the people who tried to kill you? His expression darkened. That's a family dispute that got out of hand. My cousin Antonio thinks he should be running the South Florida operations instead of me. He's been making moves to change the current leadership structure by killing you. Among other tactics, yes. We continued the tour, moving out onto the back terrace that overlooked a swimming pool and the ocean beyond. The view was breathtaking, all blue water and white sand stretching to the horizon. But I was having trouble concentrating on the scenery. Julian, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Always. Am I safe here, really safe? Or am I just in a different kind of danger? He stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression serious. You are safer here than you would be anywhere else in the world. No one gets onto this property without my knowledge. No one threatens anyone under my protection without answering to me personally. And no one, not my cousin, not his allies, not anyone, will hurt you while you're with me. But what happens when I'm not with you anymore? What happens when the situation resolves itself and I go back to my regular life? Something shifted in his expression, a kind of vulnerability I hadn't seen before. I was hoping you might decide not to go back to your regular life. What? I meant what I said last night, Sarah. I want you to stay. Not just until this is over, but permanently. I stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. Julian, I barely know you. Yesterday was the first time I'd ever seen you. You can't just ask someone to change their entire life after knowing them for 2 days. Why not, if it's the right person? How could you possibly know I'm the right person? He moved closer to me, close enough that I could smell his cologne again, close enough that I had to look up to maintain eye contact. Because in 36 years, no one has ever fought for my life the way you did. Because you're standing in my house, surrounded by evidence of wealth and power that most people would do anything to be part of. And your biggest concern is whether you deserve to be here. Because you look at me like I'm a man worth saving, not a problem to be solved. You are a man worth saving, I said before I could stop myself. Then stay and save me, he said quietly. Every day. Stay and let me take care of you the way you took care of me. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. Julian ... double quotes. I know it's crazy. I know it's too fast. I know you have every reason to say no. But I also know that what I feel for you isn't something I'm going to find with anyone else. What do you feel for me? He reached up and touched my face, the same gentle contact that had made my breath catch last night. Like I've been waiting my entire life for you to walk into that trauma bay and refuse to let me die. The rational voice in my head was screaming warnings about moving too fast, about getting involved with dangerous men, about throwing away my carefully structured life for someone I'd just met. But that voice was getting quieter by the minute, drowned out by the way Julian was looking at me and the way my body was responding to his touch. I can't give you an answer right now, I said finally. This is all too much too fast. I need time to think. Take all the time you need, he said. But while you're thinking, let me show you what this life could look like. Let me show you how good we could be together. Before I could ask what he meant, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Miami General again. I should take this, I said, stepping away from Julian's touch. Sarah, thank God. It was Dr. Rodriguez again, and he sounded even more stressed than yesterday. Where are you? Are you safe? I'm fine. I'm somewhere safe. Why? Because those men came back to the hospital this morning. Same 3 guys in expensive suits, but this time they brought friends. They're asking about you everywhere, the pharmacy, the billing department, even the parking garage attendants. They want to know everything about you. I felt Julian's hand settle on my lower back, studying me. What did you tell them? Nothing, but I'm not sure how long I can keep your information protected. These guys aren't taking no for an answer, and they seem to have unlimited resources. Sarah, I think you need to consider calling the police. Maybe even the FBI. I looked up at Julian, who had clearly heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. He shook his head slightly. I can't do that right now. I told Dr. Rodriguez, but I promise you I'm safe where I am. Where are you? I can't tell you that. But I'm protected and I'm okay. After I hung up, Julian pulled me into his arms. Not romantically, just protectively, holding me against his chest while I processed what Dr. Rodriguez had told me. They're really not going to give up, are they? I said into his shirt. No, but it doesn't matter. They can ask all the questions they want. They'll never get close to you. How can you be so sure? Because I've been dealing with men like my cousin my entire life. They're persistent, but they're not patient. They'll make a move soon, probably within the next few days. And when they do, we'll end this. What kind of move? Julian was quiet for a moment. The kind that requires you to stay here until it's over. That afternoon, Julian had business to attend to, phone calls and meetings that he conducted in his office with the door closed. I spent the time reading in the library and trying to wrap my head around my situation. Every book I picked up seemed to mock me. Romance novels where the heroine fell for the dangerous man and lived happily ever after. Thrillers where ordinary people got caught up in extraordinary circumstances and either died or emerged transformed. Which category was I in? Was this a fairy tale or a cautionary tale? Around 4 o'clock, Valentina found me with another garment bag. Mr. Marchetti has a business dinner tonight, she explained. He was hoping you would accompany him. This dress was even more elegant than the one from last night. Deep red silk that hugged my curves and made my skin look luminous. When I put it on, I felt like a different person entirely. Not just dressed up, but transformed into someone who could belong in Julian's world. Signorina, Valentina said as she helped me with the necklace that had come with the dress. May I speak freely? Of course. In 30 years of working for this family, I have never seen Mr. Marchetti look at anyone the way he looks at you. He is a good man despite what the world thinks. He deserves to be happy. It's complicated, Valentina. Love is always complicated, she said with a knowing smile. That's what makes it worth fighting for. Julian was waiting for me in the foyer when I came downstairs, and the look on his face when he saw me made all the uncertainty worth it. He looked at me like I was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. You're stunning, he said, offering me his arm. Ready to see another part of my world. The business dinner was at an upscale restaurant in downtown Miami, the kind of place where the menu didn't have prices and everyone seemed to know everyone else. Julian introduced me simply as Sarah with no explanation of who I was or why I was there. But the way he kept his hand on my back, the way he made sure I was comfortable, the way he included me in conversations, it all felt like he was presenting me as something more than just a guest. Julian, said a distinguished older man who approached our table during dessert. I heard about the trouble with Antonio. Anything I can do to help? It's handled, Marco, but I appreciate the offer. And who is this lovely lady? This is Sarah Mitchell, Julian said, and the pride in his voice when he said my name made my heart skip. She's very important to me. After dinner, we sat in Julian's car in the restaurant parking lot, not quite ready to go home, but not ready for the evening to end either. That wasn't what I expected, I said. What did you expect? I don't know, something more ... criminal? That felt like a normal business dinner with very well-dressed people. Julian laughed, a rich sound that I was beginning to love. Most of my life is normal business, Sarah. Meetings and contracts and negotiations. It's not all gunfights and dramatic confrontations. But some of it is. Some of it is, he agreed. The parts that matter are normal, though. Family dinners and charity events and arguing about what movie to watch. The same things everyone else does. Is that what you want? Normal things? With you? Yes. I want to take you to dinner without having to worry about who might be watching. I want to wake up next to you in the morning and argue about whose turn it is to make coffee. I want to meet your friends and have you meet mine. I want normal things, Sarah. I just want them with someone extraordinary. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Julian received a phone call around 8 a.m. that had him speaking rapid Italian and making urgent calls to various members of his organization. When he found me having breakfast on my terrace, his expression was grim. "What's wrong?" I asked immediately. Antonio made his move. Last night, while we were at dinner, his people hit 3 of my businesses and one of my associates' homes. No one was killed, but the message was clear. What message? That he's done being subtle. This is war now, Sarah, which means you can't leave this house until it's over. For how long? I don't know. Days, maybe a week. I set down my coffee cup, trying to process what he was telling me. Julian, I can't just disappear from my life indefinitely. I have responsibilities, people who depend on me. Your hospital has already been contacted. You're on indefinite medical leave due to a family emergency. Your rent will be paid, your bills will be handled, everything will be taken care of. You can't just make decisions about my life without asking me. I can, when those decisions keep you alive, he said, his voice harder than I'd heard it before. This isn't negotiable, Sarah. Antonio knows about you now. He knows you're important to me. That makes you a target, and targets don't get to live normal lives until the threat is eliminated. I stood up from the table, anger and frustration boiling over. So what am I now, a prisoner? A bird in a very expensive cage? You're protected. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my choices have been taken away just like they would be if I were a prisoner. Julian's expression softened slightly. Sarah, I know this is hard. I know it's not what you signed up for. But I will not let anything happen to you. Not while you're under my protection. And what if I don't want your protection anymore? What if I want to go home and take my chances? Then you'd be dead within 24 hours. He said bluntly. And I'd spend the rest of my life knowing that I failed to protect the woman who saved my life. The finality in his voice stopped my protest before I could voice it. This wasn't Julian being controlling or possessive. This was Julian being realistic about a danger I didn't fully understand. How long has this been going on? I asked. This thing with your cousin. 2 years. Ever since my father died and I took over the family operations. Antonio thinks he has a better claim to leadership because he's older, because he's been in the business longer. He's been building support, making alliances, waiting for the right moment to challenge me. And I gave him that moment by saving your life. No, you gave me a reason to make sure this ends permanently instead of just managing it indefinitely. That afternoon, while Julian was in meetings with his security team, I called Dr. Rodriguez to check on my patients and colleagues. Sarah, where the hell are you? He asked immediately. Those men came back again yesterday, and this time they had a police detective with them. They're claiming you're a material witness in an ongoing investigation. What kind of investigation? They wouldn't say, but the detective seemed legit. Sarah, what have you gotten yourself mixed up in? I looked around at the opulent guest wing where I was staying, thought about the man who'd bought me designer dresses and protected me with an army of loyal followers. I honestly don't know anymore. That evening, Julian found me in the library, staring out at the ocean through the floor-to-ceiling windows. You're having second thoughts, he said, settling into the chair next to mine. Wouldn't you? Probably. This isn't exactly the life most people dream of. What is it exactly? Your life, I mean. If I stayed, if we did this, what would my days look like? Julian was quiet for a long moment. Peaceful, mostly. I work from home a lot, so we'd see each other during the day. Evening events sometimes, charity galas, business dinners, family gatherings. Vacations to places where no one knows our names. A life that's comfortable and safe and probably a lot quieter than you'd expect. And the dangerous parts? You'd never be involved in those directly, but you'd know they exist. You'd worry sometimes when I'm late coming home. You'd learn to read the signs when trouble is building. You'd have to trust that I know how to handle it. Could you handle it, really? Could you keep me safe and yourself safe and build something real together? Yes, he said without hesitation, but only if you let me. Only if you decide that what we could have together is worth the risk. That night, I dreamed about my old life. My small apartment, my predictable schedule, the quiet safety of a world where the most dangerous thing I faced was a difficult patient or a grumpy attending physician. In the dream, I was back at Miami General, working the night shift, saving lives, and going home to an empty apartment and a microwave dinner. I woke up feeling hollow. The next morning brought news that made the decision for me. Julian received a call just as we were finishing breakfast together on the main terrace. When? He asked in a voice that made my blood freeze. How many? Are they sure? He hung up and immediately called for a security chief, speaking in rapid Italian that I couldn't follow, but that sounded urgent and angry. What happened? I asked when he finished his calls. 3 of my people were attacked early this morning while they were leaving a meeting. 1 is dead, 2 are in the hospital. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. This is escalating faster than I expected, Julian said, his expression grim. Antonio is making a play for territory, not just leadership. He's trying to start a war. What does that mean for us? It means this house goes into lockdown. No one comes or goes without my personal authorization. It means I have to make some very difficult decisions very quickly. And it means that if you're going to leave, now is your only chance. I stared at him across the breakfast table, this man who had somehow become the center of my world in less than a week. What? I can have you driven to the airport right now. Private plane to anywhere you want to go. New identity if you need one. Enough money to start over completely. You could be out of this situation within 6 hours. And if I stay, then you're in it with me until the end. However long that takes, whatever it requires. No more options to leave safely. The choice was laid out clearly in front of me. Go back to my safe, predictable life and spend the rest of my days wondering what might have been. Or stay with Julian and commit to a future I couldn't predict with a man I was falling in love with, despite every rational thought in my head. How long do I have to decide? 30 minutes. The window for getting you out safely closes after that. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the enormous bed, staring at my small suitcase that contained the remnants of my old life. 3 days' worth of clothes, some toiletries, and my nursing textbooks. Such a small collection of possessions to represent 28 years of existence. But as I looked around at the elegant guest suite where I'd been staying, I realized that I wasn't thinking about the luxury or the expensive furniture. I was thinking about Julian's laugh during dinner last night, the way he'd held my hand during the car ride home from the restaurant, the careful way he touched me like I was something precious, the look in his eyes when he told me he'd been waiting his whole life for me to walk into that trauma bay. I'd spent my entire adult life taking care of other people and asking for nothing in return. For the first time, someone wanted to take care of me. Someone who looked at me like I was a miracle instead of just a convenience. I picked up my phone and called the one person whose opinion mattered to me. Dr. Rodriguez? It's Sarah. Sarah, thank God. I've been worried sick. Where are you? I can't tell you that, but I need to ask you something. Do you think I'm a good nurse? Are you kidding? You're one of the best I've ever worked with. Why? Do you think I deserve to be happy? Of course you do. Sarah, what's going on? You're scaring me. I'm going to disappear for a while, maybe permanently. I need you to know that it's my choice and I'm safe and I'm with someone who cares about me. Sarah, I have to go. Thank you for everything. I hung up before he could ask any more questions, then called Julian. I've made my decision, I said when he answered. And? I'm staying. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that I thought the call had dropped. Sarah? Are you sure? Once I implement security protocols, there's no changing your mind. I'm sure. Why? I took a deep breath, preparing to say the words that would change my life forever. Because I'm falling in love with you. Because the last few days have been the happiest I can remember. Because when I imagine going back to my old life, it feels like dying a little bit. And because I trust you to keep me safe. I trust you to build something beautiful with me. I trust you to be worth the risk. I love you too, he said quietly. From the moment I woke up in that hospital bed and saw you fighting for my life, I've been yours. That afternoon, Julian's house transformed into something that looked more like a fortress than a home. Security personnel appeared everywhere, some in suits and some in more casual clothes, but all clearly armed and dangerous. The main gates were locked and monitored by cameras and guards. No one was getting in or out without Julian's express permission. How long will this last? I asked as we watched teams of men installing additional security equipment. Until Antonio is no longer a threat, Julian said. Days, weeks, I don't know. But however long it takes, we'll face it together. That evening, as we sat together in Julian's private study, I asked him the question that had been nagging at me. Julian, are you a good man? He looked up from the papers he'd been reviewing, clearly surprised by the question. What do you mean? I mean, in your heart, underneath all the business and the family obligations and the things you have to do to survive in your world, are you a good man? He set aside his papers and gave me his full attention. I try to be. I have rules that I never break. I don't hurt innocent people. I don't prey on the weak or the vulnerable. I protect my family and the people who depend on me. I try to leave the world a little better than I found it. But you also do things that are illegal. Yes, violent things, sometimes. When there's no other choice. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception or rationalization. But what I saw was a man who clearly struggled with the moral complexities of his life, who took no joy in the darker aspects of his business. Do you ever want out? Do you ever think about walking away from all of this? Every day, he said without hesitation. But walking away isn't really an option in my world. You're born into it and you stay until you die or until someone stronger replaces you. What about your children? If we have children, would they be born into it too? The question clearly caught him off guard. We hadn't talked about children. How do you even officially acknowledge that we were planning a future together despite the decision I'd made to stay? Not if I can help it, he said finally. I'd want them to have choices I never had. I'd want them to be doctors or teachers or whatever makes them happy. I'd want them to live in the regular world, not this one. And do you think that's possible? With enough money and enough distance, yes. I think it's possible to raise children who never have to know about this part of their father's life. That night, Julian knocked on my door around midnight. Can't sleep either? He asked when I answered. Too much thinking. Want to go for a walk? The beach is private and secure. We walked along the sand in comfortable silence, listening to the waves and breathing the salt air. The moon was full, casting everything in silver light that made the scene feel magical. Despite the armed guards I could see patrolling the perimeter of the property. Sarah, Julian said as we stopped to watch the waves. I need to tell you something. Okay. Tomorrow I'm going to end the situation with Antonio permanently. It's going to involve violence, and it's going to involve risk. There's a chance that things could go wrong. My blood turned cold. What kind of wrong? The kind where I don't come home. I turned to face him, studying his expression in the moonlight. Julian, no. There has to be another way. There isn't. Antonio has made his position clear. This ends with one of us dead or in prison. I'd prefer it to be him. What if I asked you not to do it? What if I asked you to find another solution? Then I'd have to tell you that sometimes there are no other solutions. That sometimes violence is the only language that certain people understand. I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes. I just found you. I can't lose you now. You won't, he said, pulling me into his arms. I've been preparing for this confrontation my entire life. I'm very good at what I do, Sarah. And I have every reason in the world to make sure I come home safely. Promise me. I promise, he said, and then he kissed me. It was our first real kiss, standing on the beach in the moonlight with danger closing in around us. It was soft and desperate and full of everything we hadn't said yet. It tasted like possibility and fear and love that was too new to be safe. When we broke apart, I rested my forehead against his chest and tried to memorize everything about this moment. The sound of the waves, the feeling of his arms around me, the way the moonlight made everything look like a dream. Whatever happens tomorrow, I said, I want you to know that these have been the best days of my life. They're just the beginning, he said. We're going to have 50 years of better days. The next morning, Julian left the house at dawn with a team of his most trusted men. He kissed me goodbye in the driveway in full view of his security personnel and household staff, marking me publicly as his woman in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. I'll call you when it's over, he promised. Be careful, always. I spent the day pacing around the mansion, unable to concentrate on books or television or anything else. Valentina tried to distract me with spa treatments and elaborate meals, but nothing helped. All I could think about was Julian walking into danger and the possibility that I might never see him again. Around 3 p.m., my phone rang. Julian's name on the caller ID made my heart leap. It's over, he said as soon as I answered. Are you okay? I'm fine, we're all fine. Antonio won't be threatening anyone again. Is he ... Dead, along with 3 of his lieutenants. The rest of his organization has been absorbed into mine or scattered. The threat is eliminated permanently. Relief flooded through me so completely that I had to sit down. When are you coming home? 2 hours. There are some loose ends to tie up, some arrangements to make. But then I'm coming home to you, and we're going to start our real life together. That evening, Julian returned to a hero's welcome from his household staff and security personnel. But when he found me in the library, he looked exhausted and older than his 36 years. How do you feel? I asked as he collapsed into the chair next to mine. Relieved, tired, ready to put this behind us and focus on more important things. Like what? Like you. Like us, like figuring out what we want our future to look like. And what do you think it looks like? He reached for my hand, intertwining our fingers. I think it looks like you continuing to save lives and me making sure you always have the resources to do it effectively. I think it looks like charity galas and quiet dinners and vacations to places where no one knows our names. I think it looks like the kind of normal, beautiful life that most people take for granted, with the occasional reminder that you're not exactly a normal businessman, much less frequently than you'd expect. Most of my life is meetings and contracts and phone calls. The exciting parts make good movies, but they're not the day-to-day reality. And you'd be okay with that? A quiet life with a nurse who has to work night shifts and comes home smelling like antiseptic? Sarah, he said, lifting my hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to my palm. I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who want things from me. Money, power, protection, favors. You saved my life and asked for nothing in return. A quiet life with you would be paradise. 6 months later, I was getting dressed for our engagement party in the same guest wing where Julian had first brought me for protection. Except now it wasn't a guest wing, it was our wing. Julian had renovated the space to create a private suite where we could have our own space within the larger family compound. The engagement ring on my finger was an antique that had belonged to his grandmother, a simple but elegant solitaire that caught the light whenever I moved my hand. Julian had proposed on the beach where we'd had our first kiss, going down on one knee in the sand at sunset with tears in his eyes as he asked me to be his wife. You look beautiful, cara mia, Valentina said as she helped me with the clasp on my necklace. Mr. Marchetti is a very lucky man. I'm the lucky one, I said, smoothing down the skirt of my dress. A year ago, I never could have imagined this life. Love makes everything possible, she said with the wisdom of someone who'd seen decades of family joy and sorrow. Even the most impossible things. The engagement party was held in the mansion's ballroom, filled with flowers and candles and more important people than I'd ever seen in one place. Julian had insisted on inviting my colleagues from Miami General, and it was surreal to watch Dr. Rodriguez making small talk with people who probably appeared in FBI surveillance photos. Sarah, Julian said, finding me during a quiet moment between toasts. Are you happy? I looked around at the celebration, at the faces of Julian's family and friends who had welcomed me with open arms, at the life we'd built together over the past 6 months. Ridiculously happy, I said honestly. Sometimes I feel like I'm going to wake up and discover this was all a dream. Not a dream, he said, pulling me close for a dance. Just the beginning of the rest of our lives. As we swayed together on the dance floor, surrounded by the warmth and love of the family I never had growing up, I thought about the scared, exhausted nurse who had fought to save a stranger's life in a trauma bay 11 months ago. She never could have imagined that her simple act of professional duty would lead to this, to love and security and a future brighter than anything she dared to hope for. Julian, I said as the song ended. Thank you. For what? For showing me that sometimes the most dangerous choice is also the right choice. For taking care of me the way I took care of you. For proving that fairy tales can happen to ordinary people. You're not ordinary, Sarah Marchetti, he said, using my soon-to-be-married name for the first time. You're extraordinary. And you saved my life in more ways than you'll ever know. Our wedding 3 months later was a smaller affair, held in the garden overlooking the ocean with just family and close friends in attendance. I walked down the aisle in my grandmother's dress carrying a bouquet of white roses toward the man who had changed my life completely by bleeding out on my operating table. Do you, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, take Julian Michael Marchetti to be your lawfully wedded husband? The priest asked. I do, I said, looking into the dark eyes that had first captivated me in a hospital bed. Do you, Julian Michael Marchetti, take Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. For the rest of my life, when the priest pronounced us husband and wife, Julian kissed me with a tenderness that still made my heart race after more than a year together. As the small crowd cheered and rice flew through the air, I realized that this was the moment my real life had finally begun. Not the day I'd saved Julian's life in the emergency room. Not the day I'd agreed to accept his protection. Not even the day I'd decided to stay with him despite the danger. But this moment when I officially became part of a family and a life I never could have imagined wanting. Ready for the honeymoon, Mrs. Ash? Marchetti, Julian whispered against my ear as we posed for photos. Where are we going again? Tuscany. 2 weeks in a villa where no one knows our names and our biggest worry will be which wine to have with dinner. Sounds perfect. Everything with you is perfect, he said, spinning me around in my wedding dress on the lawn where armed guards had once knelt in homage to a debt of honor. 5 years later, I was sitting in that same garden, watching our 3-year-old daughter chase butterflies through the flowers while Julian pushed our infant son in a swing he'd installed under the old oak tree. The scene was domestic and peaceful, exactly the kind of normal family moment Julian had promised me when I'd first decided to stay. Mama, look. Isabella called, holding up a flower she'd picked. Pretty. Beautiful, sweetheart, I called back, then turned to Julian. Just like her father promised, normal family life. Are you happy with normal? He asked, settling our son in his lap. I'm happy with us, I said, resting my head on his shoulder. All of us. Julian's business had evolved over the years, becoming more legitimate and less dangerous as he'd focused on real estate development and legitimate security consulting. There were still reminders of his other life, the bodyguards who accompanied us to public events, the careful background checks on anyone who worked closely with our family, the secure phone calls that happened behind closed doors. But for the most part, we lived the quiet, comfortable life he'd promised. I continued working as a nurse, though now I worked at a private clinic that Julian had funded for underserved communities. 3 days a week, I still got to save lives and help people, but without the chaos and understaffing of a public emergency room. It was perfect, meaningful work that made a difference, but with the resources and support to do it effectively. Do you ever miss it? Julian asked as we watched our children play. The excitement, the adrenaline? Your old job was certainly more dramatic than family practice. I thought about those frantic nights in the trauma bay, the constant stress of never having enough time or resources, the exhaustion that had been my constant companion for 5 years. Not for a second, I said honestly. This is better than anything I could have imagined. Even on the days when Isabella decides to redecorate the living room with finger paints. Especially then, that night after the children were in bed, Julian and I sat on our private terrace overlooking the ocean. The same view I'd fallen in love with during my first week in his house when I'd been a terrified nurse hiding from professional killers. Now it was the view from our bedroom, our life, our forever. Julian, I said as we shared a glass of wine and listened to the waves. Do you remember what you said to me that first night about wanting normal things with someone extraordinary? I remember everything about those first few days. Why? Because I want you to know that you were right. This is everything I never knew I wanted. The ordinary moments are the most extraordinary of all. Even the 3 a.m. feedings? Even those. Especially when you're the one getting up to handle them. I love you, Sarah Marzetti, he said, pulling me close. I love you for saving my life. I love you for choosing this life with me. And I love you for giving me everything I never knew I needed. I love you too, I said, settling into his arms. My dangerous, protective, surprisingly domestic mafia boss. Former mafia boss, he corrected. Current devoted husband and father. Best career change ever. As we sat together in comfortable silence, watching the moonlight dance on the water, I thought about the night I treated a man with no name and inadvertently changed my entire life. If someone had told that exhausted, lonely nurse that she was about to fall in love with our patient and end up living in a mansion with 2 beautiful children and a man who worshipped the ground she walked on, she never would have believed it. But sometimes the most impossible things turn out to be the most true. Sometimes saving someone else's life saves your own. And sometimes the most dangerous choice you can make is also the choice that leads to everything you've ever wanted. Thank you, I whispered against Julian's chest. For what this time? For bleeding out on my operating table. For kneeling men in my front yard. For scaring me into the best decision I ever made. Thank you for refusing to let me die. For trusting me when you had every reason to run. For building this beautiful life with me. Best partnership ever. Forever partnership, he corrected, kissing the top of my head. Forever. As I listened to the waves and felt the solid warmth of my husband's arms around me, forever sounded absolutely perfect.